Hi, I'm Jacob, and for my research into characters for our 2-minute thriller opening, I looked at various different people with split personalities and various detectives from the thriller genre. Now, the most notable split personality in history is the story of the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The storyline for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde follows Henry Jekyll, who is a well-respected member of London society. In his personal life, he is pre-engaged to Muriel Carew, the daughter of Brigadier General. In his professional life, he is a medical doctor, scientist, and academician. He theorises that in each man is a good side and an evil side, which can be separated into two. In doing so, the evil side can be controlled and the good side can live without worry, in combination leading to his betterment of society. In his experiments, he uses himself as the subject to test the hypothesis. His evil side, who he coins Mr. Hyde, escapes into London and terrorises party girl Ivy Pearson. Jekyll, aware of Hyde's goings-ons, decides to stop his experiments because the suffering he has caused to Ivy. What Jekyll is unaware of is how ingrained Hyde is on Jekyll's life. Now we'll be talking about the characters. The first character is Dr. Jekyll, who is a 50-year-old doctor who's outgoing and well-liked by his many friends. But he often feels like an imposter, as he's torn between his attempts to be good and his evil fantasies. This complex character tries to deal with the other side of his personality by creating a potion that lets him transform into someone else. Then there's Mr. Edward Hyde, who represents the evil side of Jekyll's personality. Considered his alter ego, he's the person Jekyll transforms into after drinking a special serum. He's physically smaller and younger than Jekyll, and he awakens terror and disgust in others. His evil nature causes him to commit many crimes without any guilt. Hyde's power over Jekyll becomes so strong that Jekyll ultimately resorts to killing himself and Hyde in the process. The story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and the split personalities has had many adaptations in media throughout the years. Most notably in today's media is Walter White / Heisenberg from Breaking Bad. Now, Walter Hartwell White, also known as his clandestine pseudonym Heisenberg, was a chemist and a former chemistry teacher in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who, after being diagnosed with stage 4A inoperable lung cancer, started manufacturing crystal methamphetamine to both pay for his treatments and provide his family for the event of his passing. He is the central character of the series and is portrayed as the protagonist, antagonist, and anti-hero. Walter White starts the show as a milquetoast, middle-aged high school chemistry teacher who's greatly overqualified. He lives with his family in a modest house but has trouble making ends meet. In order to make some extra cash, he works a part-time job at a car wash after school. Though hired to work the register, his boss forces him to wash cars outside, where he's humiliated by one of his students, who drives a much nicer car than Walt does. At home, his sex life appears to be passionless. Skylar seems more involved in selling their household items on eBay and sharing an intimate moment in the bedroom. And Walt has trouble getting inspired anyway. To make matters worse, Walt has a loudmouth alpha male brother-in-law, Hank, who has a flashy job as a DEA agent, which is infinitely more impressive to Walt Jr. than Walt's own job as a chemistry teacher. The Heisenberg persona is first born when Walt goes to confront Tuco after Tuco beats up Jesse and took the meth without paying. As a result of hair loss caused by chemotherapy, Walter shaved his head earlier that episode. When Tuco asks him who he is, Walter introduces himself as Heisenberg for the first time. Bryan Cranston says, "I think he takes on that name and the look in order to not recognise himself, that as long as he doesn't recognise the man in the mirror, he can sort of keep going." As his first action as Heisenberg, Walt throws a piece of fulminated mercury on the floor, triggering a large explosion. Vince Gilligan said, "For my money, this is the moment in the series where he really breaks bad." Heisenberg wears a pork pie hat to signify when he becomes Heisenberg, and grows a goatee to show how he is losing the man he was and becoming Heisenberg. Now we'll be talking about detective characters I've researched into. The first one is James Gordon from Gotham. Detective James Gordon is a police homicide detective with the Gotham City Police Department. He was assigned to investigate the deaths of Thomas and Martha Wayne. He is the main protagonist of Gotham and is portrayed by Ben McKenzie. James Gordon grew up in the suburbs surrounding Gotham City, where his father was a successful district attorney. and according to Carmine Falcone, a friend of the mob boss. When he was around 12 to 13 years of age, a drunk driver slammed into the car he and his father were in. His father didn't survive the accident. He romanticised Gotham as a glamorous and exciting metropolis. Before joining the GCPD, Gordon was recognised as a war hero. This fact makes him prone to dangerous kind of heroism in the view of his new partner, Harvey Bullock. In stark contrast to the other police officers in Gotham, Gordon possesses a strong moral compass which guides his every action in morally deprived city he calls home. This, along with his sense of empathy and willingness to point out the corruption frequently gets on his nerves of his co-workers. Despite being surrounded by chaos, Gordon remains composed, knowing it's one of the few things he can do to survive in the ever-declining Gotham. He wears a trench coat and a suit, which is usually a bit scruffy to show he's distressed. Next, I'll be talking about Rustin Cole from True Detective. Russ is a talented but troubled detective, dedicated to his work and renowned for his abilities to get confessions from criminals. He carries an unusually large ledger, which he uses to keep notes and sketches of crime scenes, earning him the nickname the Taxman from his colleagues. Russ is aloof. At one point, his partner Martin Hart says that he wasn't big on talking, except when he wanted him to shut up. He seems to prefer living by himself and doesn't appear that he ever has been able to sustain a relationship for longer than a few years. Russ is not prone to material desires, and his apartment is bare, with only a simple bed and books on various sex crimes. He suffers from insomnia, which may partially be a consequence of his past drug use. Later in life, we see him to be a degenerate alcoholic. Russ shows disappointment and anger at Marty when he cheats on his wife. He visits Marty's house to mow the lawn when he is away. He enjoys eating dinner with Marty's family and talking to Marty's wife, Maggie Hart. He wears a suit with the top button undone. Also from True Detective, I looked at Martin Hart. Marty is a gregarious and affable police detective who thinks of himself as a regular type dude. He was a sports star at USL and was married to Maggie Hart, presumably at a younger age. He has two daughters, Audrey and Maisie. The one thing Marty does manage well is the political aspects of his work life. He has earned the trust of his commanding officers and respect from his colleagues. Marty is usually tasked as the lead detective by his superiors and is often responsible for taking care of the paperwork, leading to briefing sessions or speaking to the media. In general, Marty is not egotistical or ambitious man. He takes pride in being able to maintain a healthy work-life balance. Marty is more conservative than his partner Rustin Cole, who prefers to follow standard procedure when investigating crimes. While he may not always understand Rust's method, he believes his partner to be a talented detective with a real mind for police work and respects his commitment. He will often run interference between Rust and their commanding officer. He wears a suit and the top button undone, just like Rust does. Now I'll be talking about Danny Williams from Hawaii Five-0. Detective Sergeant Danny Williams is a police detective who originally worked in New Jersey but moved to Hawaii to remain close to his daughter, Grace Williams. Unlike Steve, who is typically calm and in control, Danny is nearly always displaying one emotion or another. The most obvious is anger, as he possesses a very hot-headed nature with a vicious temper to match. He is also the most outspoken of the team, and quite possibly the whole H50 force and the HPD, regardless of where he is and who's around to hear him. Despite his off-putting and at times offensive attitude, Danny is also one of the most openly affectionate characters and fiercely loyal to his friends and family. Of the four main members of the task force, Danny is the most vocal, as his partner and, as Danny calls him, an animal and Neanderthal. Steve is the person most often on the receiving end of one of Danny's long-winded explanations of what's wrong with the current situation. As Danny expresses a deep dislike for Steve's methods, such as going into a house without backup and isn't afraid to tell him so, as loudly as he pleases. Despite his abrasive personality, both Steve and Mecca cite Danny as a great cop, with good instincts. He is also shown to comfort the victim/victim's family when they are in distress, presumably because Danny is a father. He wears a shirt and a tie, which he is mocked for. Also from Hawaii Five-0, I looked at Steve McGarrett. Being a former military man, Steve can be described as stiff or wooden. Steve seldom shows his emotions. According to Detective Lieutenant Chin Ho Kelly, Steve has a laser focus embedded in his DNA. Mary also adds that Steve is like a ninja. Steve is a fearless, resourceful and loyal man, as Pat Jameson, the murdered governor, entrusted Steve with establishing a task force. However, Steve knows little about human interaction and is originally awkward around children. Despite this, there is a softer, goofier and warmer side to him with his sister Mary and Danny. Although Steve's partner Danny irritates him often and they often argue, Steve deeply cares about Danny and the rest of 5-0. Steve is willing to risk everything and anything to save those he cares for, as shown in various episodes. He is also willing to go against protocol and stay behind and aid a friend who is in danger, which is seen in another episode when he stays behind to talk to Chin, who has a bomb collar around his neck. He usually wears a t-shirt and combat trousers to show his more Navy side than his police side. Next is Dr. John Watson from Sherlock. Dr. John Hamish Watson is the best friend and assistant of Sherlock Holmes and a former British Army doctor. Before marrying Mary Mortensen, he lived at 221B Baker Street with Sherlock, a flat they rented from Mrs. Hudson. He lived with Mary, whom he worked with before developing a romantic relationship. John is extremely brave, resourceful and practical. He is extremely loyal to Sherlock and will usually, but not always, do what Sherlock asks him to, and cares a great deal about his well-being. Sherlock likewise cares about John. He is also very selfless and modest, as he puts himself at colossal personal risk to help Sherlock Holmes, and is rather sceptical about his companion's ideals. He is very sarcastic and has an erratic sense of humour. John deals with lack of stimulation little better than Sherlock does, the difference being that when Sherlock is bored, he is very vocal in his frustration. When John feels that nothing ever happens, he withdraws into a shell and shows strong tendencies towards depression, possibly exacerbated by his post-traumatic issues. He is adept at reading people through facial expressions, while Sherlock relies on his surroundings, on clothing and personality displays to read people. He usually wears a shirt, jacket, jumper or cardigan to show he's more of a normal person than an actual detective. Now we'll be talking about the two main detectives from Seven. First one is David Mills. Detective David Mills is partnered with Detective William Somerset in the film Seven. The character is played by Brad Pitt. At the start of the film, he is just transferred to the city police department after many years of working upstate, a presumably more suburban or rural area. Although he is an experienced and capable police officer, he does not have the level of professional maturity that Somerset has. David Mills wants to make a difference in the world. He fought to be assigned to a busier area so that he could work big cases. He is dedicated and highly motivated, though a little over his head in the case depicted in Seven. Admittedly, the film shows a once-in-a-lifetime case that would try any investigator. He is by nature hot-headed and impatient. He is prone to losing his temper and acting out violently when frustrated. As Somerset puts it, he feeds off his emotions. Though this does not always serve him well, it also makes him physically courageous and a very dogged adversary. He wears a leather jacket with a shirt and tie. Then there's William Somerset. William Somerset is an extremely experienced and efficient homicide detective. He is a cerebral man, and as such, he is methodical in his methods. However, he has seen so much human suffering in his 37 years on the department that he has become cynical. Though this is a danger for anyone involved in the law enforcement career, it is particularly poignant on this case, because he is also by nature a bit of a philosopher. He always asks questions that other officers will not ask. He seems to want to understand the emotional underpinnings of every deviant act he is forced to bear witness to, yet he must also strive to maintain a detached, almost clinical view of his fellow man. His detachment makes him pretty much unflappable under normal conditions, and pretty hard to spook under the trying circumstances. By his own admission, he can be a bit abrasive, especially when involved in an investigation. Now, he wears a trench coat, suit, tie, and trilby. Now I'll be talking about John Hartigan from Sin City. John Hartigan is a major character in That Yellow a Basin City police detective who refuses to bow to corruption that has engulfed the city. His dedication to law and order lands him on the wrong side with Senator Rourke, who targets him for revenge. At the start of That Yellow Hartigan is pushing 60. He has a distinguishing cross-shaped scar on his forehead, the cause of which is undisclosed. He is presented as a muscular and imposing man, capable of holding his own in a fight. He also suffers from angina, which consistently affects his work, despite his attempts to ignore and or fight through it. He's almost always dressed professionally, most commonly wearing an Oxford shirt, tie and dress slacks, along with his signature trench coat. A veteran police detective of Basin City, Hartigan is gruff, stoic and cynical. He is also completely selfless. He cares little about his own well-being, as long as he can protect his fellow citizens. He risks his own safety and reputation to achieve that end throughout the graphic novel. This process eventually destroys his life. Hartigan possesses a seemingly indomitable will, able to withstand multiple bullet wounds without collapsing, and most notably being capable of willing himself back to life after being hanged to death. Next, I'll be talking about Stephen Holder from The Killing. Holder grew up in a tough neighbourhood and was exposed to various things within his area as a teen, such as drugs. He has been interested for some time in becoming a detective and assumingly went to college, where he got a degree and eventually got stationed in the narcotics department. Because of his past, which was also influenced by his general persona and clothing style, he was able to connect to teens, as well as adapt a hard-boiled attitude towards anyone. He had great success in narcotics, which soon led to his lieutenant promoting him. He wears a hoodie and a jacket. The last character I looked into was Cole Phelps from LA Noire, the video game. Cole Phelps is a central character and the protagonist of LA Noire. Phelps is a former officer in the United States Marine Corps who later returned from the war as a hero, joining the Los Angeles Police Department. Soon after, he quickly rose through the ranks and became a detective. As a police officer and later as a detective, Phelps demonstrated himself as highly intelligent, methodical and adaptable to a range of situations. Cole is driven to keeping the streets of LA clean and safe from murder, drugs and corruption. He has a strong sense of justice and dedication to protecting the people of LA and lacks any political agenda. One of Cole's most defining personal traits is that he is very open-minded and accepting. This is evident by his lack of sexist or racist views. During World War II, Cole saw both sides as equals and viewed the Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor as justified, openly stating that he respects the Japanese. He earned the disapproval of some, however, by expressing his respectful, almost sympathetic view towards the enemies. Now, he's shown wearing a suit and trilby a lot of the time also. Now, from my research into the typical detective seen in the media, we have decided that the type of character we'd like to go for is one who is fairly new to the police force, yet is widely respected for past events that they've done. Out of the good cop, bad cop scenario, they should predominantly be the good cop, with features like caring, courageous, and prone to acts of heroism. These qualities would be effective as the viewer would not expect somebody who is known for being kind and respected could have a really deeply sinister side to them. The costume the majority of detectives wear are suits, which have the top button undone or the tie a bit loose, to show that their job is a stressful one and they had to do a lot of hard work. Furthermore, many of the detectives wear hats, most notably a trilby, which has been widely associated with detectives, usually in the noir genre. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.